Well, good Monday morning to you. Welcome to our Monday morning live edition of the Doctor's Nutrition Show. I'm your host, Jim Tabor, along with Dr. Jim and Janine Fox of Doctor's Nutrition, located on Calvin Lorraine Road in Gulfport, just south of Pass Road. We do this every Monday morning. It is a live call-in show in which we pick a topic, and then we invite you to call in and ask questions regarding that, kind of educate you on that. And we invite you to call in at 896-0713 or 800-349-0713. You can pass your question along to the producers, and they'll pass it along to us. Or any questions you might have regarding your health, because that's what this show is all about, trying to live a healthier lifestyle. So we're talking about this morning something that everybody has to deal with. It's in our, everybody's got it.
Yep.
And that's lipids and cholesterol. So what are lipids and what do they do for the body?
Well, lipids, the term lipids just means fats. Okay, so any fat is a lipid. Okay, whether it's olive oil or whether it's something in your cholesterols and stuff in your body. And when you go to the doctor and they check your cholesterol, what they're looking at is what they call a lipid panel. It's not just cholesterol, it's got a lot of other stuff in it too. For instance, you get your LDLs and your HDLs, and everybody thinks, oh, that's the good and the bad cholesterol. It's a little bit more detailed than that. An LDL fraction, it's actually called a low-density lipoprotein or a high-density lipoprotein. And if you've looked at yours recently, they probably did something called a VLDL, very low-density lipoprotein. That's associated mainly with your triglyceride content. But that's just your typical quote-unquote lipid panel where they check your cholesterol.
Because as triglycerides go up, your VLDLs have to go up because they carry the triglycerides around. Now, we decided to do this show because we talked to a lot of people and they don't necessarily understand any of it. And they think, oh, cholesterol bad. No, it's not. You have to have cholesterol.
Yep.
Cholesterol is necessary. So just because your LDL cholesterol is high does not mean there's always a problem. And just because you have high HDLs does not mean that you're always protected.
That's true.
So that's kind of what we were going to go through, is what to look at and extra things if you have a problem or you have a family history or you're really concerned, other testing that can be done to look more in detail at your lipids. Because the regular lipid panel is very limited.
Yeah, and it's calculated. Dr. Friedewald, I call it the Friedewald calculation, and he's the one that came up with how to calculate, okay, if we get your total stuff here, we can kind of calculate these things out, unless those triglycerides are too high, then they kind of block and mess up everything.
Can't even, yeah.
Yeah, it makes it, worthless, so to speak. But it's a real interesting, because we get a lot of people come in and they're taking cholesterol medication, and you look at we look at their lipid panel that they did, and we say, okay, if you've got a cardiovascular risk, really there's more to it than just looking at cholesterol or just looking at that standard lipid panel. We do something called an NMR, and we do a lot of it. And it's a nuclear magnetic resonance. Yep, an MRI of your lipids.
Right,
okay.
so it's not.
That's what it is. Okay.
It's an MRI,
yeah.
So it's much more accurate.
Right.
Gives you more information.
That way you can actually see the actual lipids rather than just calculate them, okay?
Right.
We can actually see them, and one of the most important things is we can see something called particles.
Yeah, and the particles are actually what can cause a problem, not really cholesterol.
Yeah.
Half of all people that have heart attacks have normal cholesterol.
Right.
Cholesterol alone is not what you want to look at. And I know a lot of people, that's all they do look at. There's other factors, your C-reactive protein, which looks for inflammation in the arteries. Homocysteine will block an artery way quicker than cholesterol. When we do our cardiac panel, it actually looks at all that. It doesn't look at just the lipids. Now, lipids is just one little factor. And you got to look at, just because that you get them in normal range on a regular lipid panel does not mean your particles are normal. Right. And just because your cholesterol is high on a regular panel does not mean it's the bad kind. Not all cholesterol is created equal. And that's kind of, it
true.
Really isn't. I mean, even LDL in one person can mean one thing and another person mean another.
Yeah.
I was just looking at some of our ones that came back yesterday, because we had quite a few. And it was, somebody with an LDL of 165, they had no particles. And so their cholesterol was not necessarily bad for them. The people that actually had normal LDLs, but your particles were off the charts, they still have a big risk. Now, what we have found over the years of doing this, and we've done it for a long time, and we've been doing the NMR for a long time, even though it's technically a newer test, but newer now is 15 years.
I was going to say newer
now is 15, 20 years, but it will tell you a lot more information. We have found that the people with the higher triglycerides and are the ones that tend to have the worst particles. Mm-hmm. So if you have high triglycerides, there is no doubt that is going to be an extra cardiac risk. Your people that just have naturally high cholesterol, but their HDLs are great, their triglycerides are great, they don't have a high insulin resistance score, those people are the ones that we find on the NMR probably have a better pattern.
Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, some of the latest research out there, and something that was put out, believe it or not, now there's a study, or a separate specialty, if you will, called lipidology. Yep. Yeah, now we got lipidologists out there, which is good because it's so much information. Believe me, I mean it's overwhelming. It really is. The amount of information they've garnered from the research over the past 15 years, it's unbelievable. But one of the things that they've come up with, and they said one of the most predictive things on that standard little lipid panel that you have done, not your LDL, it's your HDL triglyceride ratio. Take your triglycerides and divide into it your HDLs. Now that, if you got a 3 or less, probably okay. If it's higher than that, probably not. So if you got 150 on a triglyceride, which is technically still not, it's acceptable.
I was going to ask you, what is the safe range, as far as for having the numbers for the HDL and LDL?
Well, there's the HDL.
I always say depends on the person.
It depends on the person.
Triglycerides are what you got to look at.
Well, you had mentioned that a while ago.
The triglycerides, yeah, because
have high HDL and high LDL would still be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but when you look at that HDL triglyceride ratio, if you got say a triglyceride of 140, well in range, everybody says, oh, you're fine. Then when you divide into it your HDL, let's say your HDL is 40, all right? How many times does 40 go into 140?
More than 3.
More than 3, right? You're not good. So that's what you have to look at. And we look at that and we see an awful lot of problems there.
Right.
At that point, we suggest that NMR so we can actually look at those particles, look at all the details.
Now, also though, when your triglycerides, even though the range on the triglycerides of the lab usually goes to 150.
149, yeah.
Yeah, 149. 150 is high.
Technically.
149 is not. Really, when you start looking at it, you really don't want those triglycerides over 60 to 80.
60 is what the research says.
60, some people say 80. Yeah. So we'll talk about that more when we come back from the break.
All right, it's 8 minutes after 9 o'clock. We're talking about lipids and cholesterol this morning, and we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. And welcome back to our Monday morning live edition of the Doctor's Nutrition Show. We're talking about LDLs, HDLs, and lipids and cholesterol and all that. Talk a little bit more about triglycerides.
Well, okay, a triglyceride, for instance, when you consume fructose, like in high fructose corn syrup, that kind of stuff, all right, our body can't use fructose. It says, I don't know what to do with this. So it sends it to the liver. Liver says, I have a solution. I'll take 3 of those dudes and we'll tie them to this glycerin molecule and we'll call it a triglyceride and you can use it for fuel. So it's like, our body runs on 2 fuels. And it's sort of like a diesel and gasoline both, gasoline being glucose and diesel being triglycerides because it's basically fats that the body has made things in it like that into a fat. And when you pinch an inch, you've seen those old commercials about pinching an inch on your belly, hey, you're pinching triglycerides. That's how they're stored. So our body either uses them for fuel or stores them as fat.
And the people that actually have the higher levels of triglycerides are the ones that tend to gain weight in the middle.
Yep.
When you have people come in that talks about I gain it all right here, and you can almost tell what their triglycerides are going to be when you actually do their test.
They're going to be over 60.
People that gain weight everywhere doesn't tend to have the higher triglycerides, and they can, but the people that gain it mostly in the middle almost always have the high triglycerides. Now, triglycerides, people always come in thinking that fat is what's make triglycerides, and that's not true, it's sugar. So mostly. Eating too much sugar and too many carbs are what actually elevates triglycerides. Now, cholesterol will be increased by bad fat consumption, but the triglycerides will not. And triglycerides really are what causes the bigger risk. And so and then some people have high of both. If your triglycerides get too high, then you have to elevate your VLDLs, and then that elevates your cholesterol. So it is a roundabout circle that, yes, sugar and carbs affect cholesterol. Although high fat can affect the cholesterol, but it doesn't necessarily affect the triglycerides.
Right.
So that's kind of the misconception out there, and that we hear a lot. And so that's why we wanted to let people know you got to do stuff to lower the triglycerides. Now, when we talk about the NMR, which we just mentioned, it's a better test. It checks a lot more things. It doesn't just do cholesterol, it does the particles. Well, particles carry the cholesterol. And particles are what is sticky and can kind of get in between things. And it also checks your total, and it checks the small ones. The small ones are the worst.
Yeah.
They can get stuck easier. So small particles are worse than big particles. Now, it also checks on the LDL size, it checks the size of your LDL. Because some people have the big fluffy ones, which are not near as big of a problem as little bitty dense ones. So that is also measured on an NMR. Now, an NMR also gives you something called the insulin resistance score.
Yeah.
It looks at 6 different values, and in some of them are in the background, you don't even actually see them, on are you insulin resistant? And what is insulin resistance? Turns into diabetes.
Pre-diabetes, basically.
Right, so you have your insulin resistance, then pre-diabetes, then diabetes. And they say it is the most predictive test on whether you are going to become or at risk for diabetes. And if you are at risk for diabetes, diabetes increases cardiac risk greatly, because it affects all these people that are diabetic and have sugar problems tend to have the small, dense particles. So it kind of it gets confusing, but there's a lot to it. But
Just go get the NMR test. And
and we'll explain it.
We'll just quit arguing about it. Just go get the NMR test.
Well,
can they just come take that?
Yeah,
Oh,
they
yeah,
can, as a matter of fact.
it is.
You know, one of the things, you know, the old test, the Friedewald test, is cheap. Okay, the NMR costs you a little bit more. It's not terribly bad. I mean, I think we do it by itself for like
I think it's 70.
70. Okay.
By itself.
So versus 25. Okay, so it's a little bit more expensive then, but you get so much more information. You get to look at those particles, and you get to see how many of them you got. Because if you got you take 2 different people, and they got an LDL fraction of say 150, but one's got really high particles. I mean, it takes a lot of particles to make up that 150. Where the other person, they got 150 total LDL, but they got just a few particles. So those particles are the little protein sacs that actually carry the cholesterol. And the less particles you have, the better off you are. And then the size is another thing.
Yeah.
And being able to check the size is huge, because no other test gives you that size. You have to be able to see it. Again, back to an NMR, which is again MRI of the blood.
Right.
So you can actually see those things. So that's a big issue. I think we got a question.
Yes. Question: can being overweight cause
And
cellulitis?
oh yeah.
It increases your risk, definitely. You don't have to be overweight to get cellulitis, but we see a lot more cellulitis in people that are overweight.
Right.
Usually being too much overweight, you're unhealthy anyway. Circulation's bad. You tend to just be prone to a lot more health issues.
Right.
Now explain what cellulitis is for those who may not know.
It's
Well,
basically inflammation in the cells.
Yeah, well, it's inflammation in the fat cells.
Because you think of I think of cellulite. I think of the
No, it's not cellulite. It's cellulitis.
Right.
Okay.
It's inflammation in
Basically
the cells.
in the cells.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so but people that's had it knows what it is.
Right.
But back to lipids. There is another test that, you do the NMR. And if you think it all looks okay, or if it don't look okay. Something that makes it even worse is if your LDLs are oxidized.
Yep. Reason being, when they go into these cadavers and people who've had heart attacks and died of stuff like that, blocked arteries, etc., the cholesterol that they pull out of those plaques, it's oxidized. The non-oxidized cholesterol doesn't cause problems. It's the oxidized LDL. Because when it's oxidized, it becomes very sticky. And you take those small particles.
And it clogs up your arteries.
It
Yeah.
starts actually getting into the cell, into the lining of that artery, and starts blocking it and building up, and it starts accumulating. That's when you get the foam cells, you get the whole schmidge. That's just really a mess. Yeah, no doubt about it.
All right. Why does it take so long to heal?
Oh, cellulitis?
Yeah.
Probably because you're still unhealthy.
Yeah.
We tell people that have cellulitis, we usually do lab work on them. We fix any underlying problems. We fix any nutritional deficiencies, also help with weight loss, and we'll use something called Olivir, which does tend to help as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Phone lines are open at 896-0713 or 800-349-0713. 18 minutes after 9 o'clock. It's our Monday morning live edition of the Doctor's Nutrition Show, talking about lipids and cholesterol. We'll be coming back in just a moment with this week's special. And welcome back. It's 20 minutes after 9 o'clock, and we're talking about cholesterol and lipids, things like that. And let's go ahead and take a look at what our special of the week is. Oh, we got two of them.
We got two of them. Yeah. Well, okay. The omega-3 EPA DHA, which is our omega-3 fish oil capsules, is 25% off because they're great at helping you get that insulin resistance under control, helping you get those triglycerides down, everything. Then we're also going to put on sale that NMR test and she's got OK, but it's actually oxidized, or OX LDL. You did good, Kay. That's real good. And it's normally $112 for that for those two tests. We're going to do both of them for $90. That's a deal.
Yeah, because
really
like I said, the oxidized LDL test itself is 50 something. So I mean, it's actually in the 50s that it costs to do it, because it's not a cheap test, because it's a very much a specialty test. But you know, there are things you can do for it if it is actually elevated. We don't check a lot of stuff just to check it when there's nothing you can do about it. So now we're going to talk about what you can do if you have problems with these areas. With your cholesterol and even particles, the things that we tend to use is the red rice yeast extract. So red rice yeast extract is really good for that, but it also niacin, especially when you have the really small LDLs
and low HDLs.
And the low HDLs.
Because it will help increase HDLs.
And so will the fish oil. Fish oil helps the HDLs some. It also is really good at lowering the triglycerides. Now our omega-3 that's on sale is a high strength omega-3, so it's way stronger than your normal omega-3 you're going to get at the big box stores. We even have one, now it's not on sale this week, but we have an omega-3 that's an EPA only omega-3. And EPA only it's really strong, but it's for those people with the really high triglycerides, which you do see.
Yeah.
If you are the 400, 500, 600 range or higher, because I had one come back at 1700 today.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really bad. That ain't the norm, but we do see them.
We do
I'm
see
trying to
them.
remember which one of those the omegas that I take. If it's the
You
EPA.
take the regular.
EPA.
You take our regular
Take
one.
our
And
regular.
most people do. For cost's sake, most people take our regular omega-3 because it's not expensive. The EPA only is expensive, but when you compare it to the prescription drug that's the same basically strength, it is way cheaper.
Way.
So there are things you can do for those extreme high triglycerides. And yes, it's the fish oil and the EPA, but also diet changes.
I was gonna
Now, we
say,
always recommend diet changes.
Yeah.
Now, like I said, there's always things you can do to lower. And on oxidized LDLs, that has nothing to do with lowering the cholesterol. Lowering the cholesterol does not help it. So these people out there that's even on cholesterol medication, your cholesterol might be low, but if it's all oxidized, what you have, you're still at risk. And things that help that is antioxidants. Now, we get questions every day. Everybody looks at you and they've heard of antioxidants, but they have no idea what they are, or how they work, or why they work, or what they do. So next week's show is on what is an antioxidant, what's it do, how does it help, and why do you need them?
Right.
So we're going to get more into detail on the antioxidants next week.
Yeah, because one of the reasons you need them is this oxidized LDL.
Exactly.
And if you've got a high oxidized LDL fraction, then you know, okay, I'm at risk. I don't care what your total, if your total cholesterol is 100, if it's all oxidized, you're at risk.
You are. And we take a lot of antioxidants.
Right.
And on our oxidized LDLs, when we check them, because we check everything on ourselves, of course.
Why not, right?
And both of ours are less than 6. They can't even be measured. There's nothing oxidized. So it does show you that taking antioxidants definitely play a role in that.
Yeah, they're very important in health, and they're very important in this lipid stuff. But when you start talking about lowering the lipids or changing the lipid panel, diet alone can make a huge difference, because the more of the sugars, even fruit, things like that taste sweet, things that you eat like that, the more of it you eat, and the more bad fats that you're going to get, from some of the bad. Well, there's tons of bad fats out there.
Yeah.
And especially some of the what they call the PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, corn oil, canola oil, those kind of things. Not necessarily the best fats to eat. They really aren't.
No.
But if you're taking those in, your body has to deal with it. And so if we can just change that, get away from eating back to the what we call the real food diet, which is real food. You eat fresh vegetables, nuts, and seeds. Those are good snacks. Lean meats, quality meats, things like, and we stress the organic thing, really do, because it is so much better for your health. Yeah.
But I've seen people change their particles greatly
Yes.
with going lower sugar, lower carb, and intermittent fasting.
Yes.
And we've had shows on intermittent fasting, and it really can play a role in your lipids because it gives the body time to process them. The thing is, if you're constantly eating and you're eating all the time, your body is constantly trying to fight this stuff. I mean, it's constant. So if you fast, if you eat all your food in 6 hours a day, then the body has all the other time to actually process it.
Yeah, and use it for fuel.
And use it for fuel before you give it more.
Yeah.
So it does make a difference. We see a big difference when people do that on their lipids and on their NMR.
Yeah, no doubt.
So there's things you can do. Thing is, we don't, like I said, we don't check things that we can't tell you what to do for it.
Right.
So the things that there's always something you can do, and usually dietary change is the first thing we tell people.
We usually start with dietary change, and I know people probably get kind of tired of that, but it's fact. It's fact of life. Because our diet, our modern diet, we're kind of painting ourselves in a corner. Our diet is so messed up in America that, and they call it the standard American diet, or SAD, and it really is sad. Yeah. It truly is. And so when you do that kind of diet day in, day out, and you don't exercise, you don't do any of you don't get any of the antioxidants and things like that that they need, the other nutrients, vitamin D, for instance, really big one. So if you don't do that, your body's, look, it's a self-healing organism, but it can only go so far.
Yep. The more you do that is not good, the more supplements you're going to have to take. I always tell people, people come in and say, I'm not changing my diet. Okay, you're going to have to take more. You're going to have to take more than somebody that's willing to change your diet in order to change it. And yes, you can change it, but we always recommend both. I mean, actually, that changes it even more. Yeah. But if you're not going to change your diet, you definitely need to do the supplements.
You're going to have to do something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And one way to find out if how bad your diet is, make a diary for several days or a whole week. Bring it in. Won't cost you a dime to do this. And sit down with the doctors and let them look at it and say, oh, yeah.
Yep. Now, real quick, if you do come in to do the NMR and oxidized LDL, it is a fasting test.
Yes.
So you need to be fasting for 12 hours before you come. You can have all the water you want, but nothing but water. So just let you know, if you come in planning on doing it when you get there, make sure you actually are fasting.
All right. Thank you again for joining us for this morning's show. Again, next week we're going to be talking about antioxidants, kind of a continuation of today's show. But we appreciate you joining with us this morning. Find a lot more information on their Facebook page as well. So we'll see you next Monday morning at 9 here on WLOX CBS.
For more information on highlighting your business and services on Healthy Living South Mississippi, contact Jim Tabor at 896-1313.